I will signal that we can start. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Dragan Tilev, and I will be moderating this session. I'm State Councillor for EU Affairs and member of the Cabinet of the Deputy Prime Minister for EU Affairs, Mr. Nikola Dimitrov. And when mentioning his name, I just want to excuse himself because he is not going to join us this afternoon for the debate, although he is on the program, because of objective reasons. So he asked me to convey his best wishes for successful and productive debate. First, let me congratulate to Minister Fatmir Besimi and to his team for organizing this conference. It's economic recovery and growth beyond COVID. This is really a challenging subject, a challenging topic. Why challenging? Simply because we are talking about economic recovery and growth beyond COVID. But first, crisis is still around us, so it has not finished. Second, many unknowns still in the equation, so we'll have to learn a lot in order to be sure that it is really behind us. And third is because it's unprecedented pandemic that the world is facing with goes beyond human comprehension. This is exactly why this conference is on good foots. It's well selected as a subject, well targeted, and appropriately represented with the panelists that I will come shortly to. The first panel this noon, right after the noon, was on global and regional challenges and prospects of recovery and growth. So the bigger picture, I would say. The second one, just before this, a very interesting debate on macroeconomic policies and public finances in post-pandemic times. And as we notice, there are a lot of interesting suggestions, new policies. Some of the speakers said it's a lot of experiments. And this is good, because that's exactly what we need to do when something is still unknown and something is still not clear. To open the debate, to discuss about that, to talk, to share the views, to exchange experiences and so on and so forth in order to come to certain conclusions that can bring us closer to closure of the problem. On this third panel, the discussion will go on good governance and social cohesion. Not less, I would say even more, maybe the most important subject, because nothing can happen on macro level or on global level without good governance and without capacity of the institutions and administration and without developing policies that will bring society together. Social cohesion is extremely important. So apart from the health crisis response, the speed of recovery of economic growth also depends on the pace of structural and institutional reforms. It's about the institutions, it's about the capacity, it's about the rule of law and implementation, it's about the control of corruption and political stability. Which policies to be implemented to ensure social cohesion and inclusive prosperity? How to increase and maintain trust in government policies? How to focus on shared values that bind the society together across internal lines and divisions that we are all witnessing, not only here, not only in the region, but worldwide. I would like to thank to all the panelists for accepting to participate and for being with us today. I will read very short introduction for each of you, but in the meantime, while I'm going to present your names and your background, I would like to ask all the panelists to join me on the stage. First speaker will be Mr. Lyubcho Nikolovsky, Deputy Prime Minister for anti-corruption and crime, sustainable development and human resources. It's a long title, but with a lot of contents, great responsibility, and I would say visible results so far. Position introduced with this government. The second will be Mr. Koen Davids, Executive Director, World Bank, covering the constituency in which North Macedonia is, together with other 12 countries, so altogether we are 13 countries. Certainly a person that knows a lot about the global movements, global problems, but also, because it's covering our constituency, is aware about specificities for the region and for North Macedonia in particular. He is the only one that will be joining us via the online connection. I hope that the technical issues are sorted out and that he will join us. The third speaker is Mr. Oliver Spasovski, Minister of Internal Affairs, certainly one of, if not the most difficult job in any government, not only this government, that works directly with all citizens and their needs, from their birth to their death and everything in between. The next would be Bojan Maričić, Mr. Bojan Maričić, Minister of Justice, in his previous life think tanker, and since last year one of the youngest members of the government, with one of the most important reforms in his hands, the fundament of the rule of law, and that is the reform of judiciary. We are on a good track, and as EU often says, we have done a lot, but still a lot to do. Ms. Barbara Kohn, President of the Friedrich Hayek Institute, founding director of the Austrian Economic Center and Vice President of the Austrian National Bank. But in her multitasking engagement, she's also a Vice Chair of the UN Focus Group on Environmental Efficiency and, for Artificial Intelligence and other emergency technologies, and Chair of the Thematic Group on the United for Smart Sustainable City Index. All hot topics of our time, but also for the future as well. His Excellency Ambassador Mr. David Geer, head of the delegation of the European Union. I would say when he speaks, it's better to listen. His advices, since he represents 27 member states, extremely complex job. And I would like to see him as a person in which mandate North Macedonia will finally open accession negotiations, hopefully. Last but not least, His Excellency, Mrs. Rachel Galloway, British Ambassador to North Macedonia, very active, vocal, clear in her messages and honest in her intentions. Back in late 90s, last century, and beginning of this century, when I say century, it sounds like a long time ago, but it was not so like a long time ago. I was witness and directly involved in UK through DFID efforts to put the foundation of the public administration reform in our country. Ambassador Galloway is continuing UK's efforts to help the country to improve the capacity of its of our public administration. We also have somewhere in the audience Professor Nikola Popovsky, a university professor at Fon University and ex-minister of finance, who will prepare written summary based on all the discussions. Just few technical issues. Good afternoon, Mr. Khan. Good to have you with us. Few technical issues. We have 90 minutes. Actually, I have already spent a few minutes, so less than 90 minutes until 6:30, so we have to close the debate at 6:30. As already noticed, the working language is English, but we also offer in Macedonian and Albanian translation during the debate. We will have 2 rounds following the examples of the previous debates, 2 rounds of questions, 1 question per speaker. I would expect and I would like to ask you to stick to 5-6 minutes answer to the question so that we have fair share of time for all the participants. The debate is open also, as I was told, on social networks, so we may receive some Twitter reactions, maybe even some questions at the end. But we will have to see, and I'm sure that provocative interventions by all the panelists will raise a lot of questions. But without further ado, I would like to invite Minister Nikolovsky to start with you. So, in your view, what were and still are the main challenges in the fight against corruption and crime? What the government measures aim at combating corruption and creating favorable conditions for economic development, investment in climate and living standards? Mr. Nikolovsky, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dragan. First of all, I would like to thanks for the invitation, personally to the Minister of Finance and Deputy Minister who is here in the room, to have an opportunity to address from this very important forum, especially in this very crucial time when the corruption is on the top level of our government and society policies. The successful fight against corruption requires wider and inclusive process that involves each and everyone in the society. This front requires joint efforts also from the government, from the institutions, from the regulatory bodies, from the citizens, from the private sector, from the non-governmental organization, from the media, political parties, regardless of the fact if they come from the ruling party or from the opposition. We need to have a joint fight against corruption because the corruption is the common enemy of all. Our political will as a government and efforts to prevent corruption are very clear, and as you mentioned, we adopt for the first time of the government level the first one plan with a lot of measures this year. We are creating a society in which there is no place for corruption, a society based on the rule of law and protection of the human rights. And this is our investment for the future generation, for a better life, and for a state with strong institutions. The fight against corruption also and crime stands among the 10 key priorities on the government framework, Action 21, European Standards at Home also. These 10 priorities will contribute to restart our Macedonian economy, to bring higher criteria in all business areas, to lead transparent authorities and institutions, and to be a service of the citizens and to the private sector also. Just last week, we launched and start a new campaign named as Now Everything is Public, Corruption Does Not Pay Off, that will raise awareness among citizens and encourage them to report possible corrupt practices. The goal is to inform the citizens that now everything is public and everything is open and everything is transparent. Other goal is to inform and motivate ordinary citizens to use the tools at their disposal to report to the institution of corrupt practices. Citizens must demand and defend their rights clearly and loudly, and the institution must protect them and work in their interest. This is shared responsibility for all of us. After detecting the shortcomings in the interinstitutional communication between the anti-corruption institutions, we have introduced regular coordination meeting on the monthly level, not only with the component government institutions and authorities, but also with independent institutions such as the State Commission for Prevention of Corruption. We have put into operation the new National Register of Real Owners this year also, and we have also strengthened the control mechanism, the inspection services, by increasing of the competencies of the inspection services, having in mind the principle that transparency is core in the fight against corruption. All ministries and agencies, as well as all municipalities and the city of Skopje, are obliged to use their websites for publishing of all 22 types of information that will provide transparency in their operation. And this is a precondition for all of them in order to obtain the funds from the central budget for which they are entitled. The plan for fight against corruption was adopted for the first time this year, and it is composed of a system of measures and politics for deep reforms within the society. This plan is built on several pillars, especially digitalization, a mechanism for checking of control of the capital, confiscation of illegally acquired property, transparency, increase of the awareness of citizens to report corruption, high level of integrity and ethical standards for public officials. The aim is to strengthen the institutions and the legal framework in terms of prevention of corruption in the country. This plan is focused on a systematic fight against corruption and organized crime and great degree of normalization of the social, economic and democratic functioning of the Republic of North Macedonia. The reduction of corruption and crime is of great importance for the progress also of the country and competition of the European perspectives also. We have to do that in order to be respected and equal partners in the Euro-Atlantic organizations. But we also have to do that for our citizens who deserve to live in a fair society without corruption, where we respected the dignity of each individual and where the laws will apply equal to each and every one person. The common goal is to build an efficient system by joint efforts so that it will open up the possibility of new perspectives. During the debate, and I think that also other ministers from Interior and for Justice will cover the other measures from the plan against corruption, and we can chance to discuss deeply about the other measures which are in the plan for fight against corruption, which is for the first time adopted on the government level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nikolowski. Thank you, Minister. I appreciate very much that you brought not only the policies of anti-corruption, but also the transparency, which is in essence one of the pillars, how to bring closer to the government and to the government policies, also the citizens and those that are using the services of the government. I would turn now to our only online speaker, participant, Mr. Kun Davids. Welcome online. I hope you hear me well. With one small, I will break a bit the rule here of these two rounds, because Mr. Kunz already announced that he will have to disconnect at 6 o'clock. So I will put the two questions all at once to Mr. Kunz, just in the case that we lose him during the debate. So I will start with a very simple question to you, Mr. Davids. What the World Bank is doing and what it can do in order to ensure sustainable reforms and improve quality of governance in the region, and more specifically in North Macedonia. European integration always goes hand by hand in partnership for good governance and human capital role for social cohesion. And further on, in the case COVID crisis extends, there is a probability about that, beyond the expected timeline. What would you suggest to the government as most important priority? Where to focus the energy? What are the priorities to squeeze the economic potential? Please, the floor is yours. Can you hear us? We might have encountered some difficulties in No response from the World Bank. I'm sure that Mr. Kunz can spend a lot of time explaining about this. But in the meantime, I will go on with the next speaker. Moja sveti. Da, da.
Hello?
Svetiš celo vreme. Can you hear us, please?
Yes, I can hear you.
Did you hear the questions?
No, I didn't hear the questions, I'm afraid.
All right, then I will go back to the questions and I will repeat them again. So I hope that now the sound is on. So I will, as I said before, and I will repeat the questions. I will start with a simple question for you, Mr. David. What the World Bank is doing and what it can do in order to ensure sustainable reforms and improve quality of governance in the region, but also more specifically in North Macedonia. I said in the region because within your constituency you have 3 Western Balkan countries together with North Macedonia. So European integration goes hand by hand in partnership for good governance, human capital, role for social cohesion. And as I said, I explained before, because you have to disconnect, I was told by your office that you have to disconnect at 6 o'clock. You may not be available for the second round, so I will shoot the second question for you right away at once, breaking a bit the rules. My question is, in the case COVID crisis extends beyond the expected timeline, what you would suggest to the government as most important priority, where to focus the energy, and how to squeeze the economic potential? I know that the World Bank quite recently has prepared a very comprehensive analysis about the potential for economic development. Maybe some highlights from that analysis. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be with you, and greetings from Washington. Maybe to start first with your last question, and that is basically the question we are all grappling with. What do we do as this crisis dissipates but is still with us? And I think the answer for all countries, of course, is first of all to continue vaccination. And North Macedonia has been doing that, the region has been doing that, and we all need to continue with that. And I think also we need to continue with the targeted assistance. I think the assistance in North Macedonia to both firms and workers has been incredibly important to basically bounce back from the crisis, and that needs to continue. And we're all struggling there with the targeting, of course, the targeting that to make sure that social protection systems reach those that need to be reached. And I think there, as you say, not just in North Macedonia, but also in the region, we need to make further progress with this targeting to make sure that this contributes to basically preventing poverty and getting back on track towards growth. And I think in terms of you were asking about the projections, and there I think we're very hopeful that the bounce back to forecasted economic growth of 3.6% for 2021 can be achieved. And I think the government's measures are very helpful in that. Coming back to your first question, I think there the answer is partly already in the question, in a sense that we do feel that the government's emphasis on regional integration, including recent initiatives, and also on the EU accession negotiations, is a very important part of reform and is a very important part of helping strengthen institutions. And that is why I really welcome this forum, because in this forum you brought together the partners, the important partners your country and the region have, and those partners can be incredibly helpful in making these reforms happen. And there, of course, because of the size of the different markets, the connection to Europe and the connection to each other is incredibly important. But one thing that I want to stress moving forward, also in terms of reform, is the fact that we need to involve young people. We need to create opportunity for young people. We need to invest in people, because I think that is extremely important. The region, of course, has a challenge of brain drain, being very close to Europe. And there, of course, it matters to show young people opportunity. And with a median age of about 39, it's very important to give youth a place in society. And there, I think I very much welcome the fact that the government has taken this initiative for a human capital strategy, because basically investing in people is a multi-sectoral issue that needs to be tackled with different ministries, different organizations, with civil society, and of course with the private sector and young people themselves. So I think that is also an extremely important part of reform to make that matter. If you look at the World Bank's Human Capital Index, which shows how investment in people, in education, health, social protection is paying off, it's been consistently going up in the case of North Macedonia, and that is very positive. But of course, the crisis has, in every country, led to setbacks. So that is why, again, looking at creating opportunities, investing in digital, investing in education is incredibly important. And that is also why human capital is a very important part of the World Bank program. It's one of the goals of the World Bank's cooperation program with North Macedonia is actually expanding the skills and opportunities for the most vulnerable. And so that is something that we look forward to continue to do. I think finally, my final comment is basically that it's clear from the conference, but it's clear also from our daily work with you, that North Macedonia has important friends and has good partners, and those partners are standing ready to help the country write the next chapter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Please stay with us as long as you can, and if there are some other interventions or questions for you while you are still online, I will certainly use the occasion and I will ask another question. But let's move now to Minister Spasovski. Господин Spasovski, с оглед на...
Mr. Spasovski, given the fact that
who needs the influence or translation, please take one. Minister Spasovski will be, I will ask a question in Macedonian and he will answer in Macedonian. So,
my first question is, given the fact that as a technical prime minister and then as a Minister of Interior, you had the immediate responsibility to deal with the challenges of the pandemic. What are your experiences in terms of the interinstitutional coordination and managing of these processes? Thank you for your question, dear ladies and gentlemen. When we are talking about an efficient management and coordination on several levels, this is the key precondition to tackle any crisis, including this current crisis that we are dealing with, and also for the coming period. And I would like to highlight that it is very much important to put all the efforts to increase public trust in the actions taken by the authorities. As President of the government and at the beginning of the crisis and now as Minister of Interior, the entire transparency about all the measures, all the actions taken by the institutions, regardless whether we are talking about on central level or local institutions, is of key importance in this crisis. The public and the citizens, only by complete transparency, can recognize the dedication and commitment to the welfare of all citizens and the health of all citizens. The public and the citizens have the right at all times to be completely informed and for us to provide transparent and credible information on the pandemic and the actions taken to address the crisis, both in terms of health and economic and social aspect. In this way, we include the citizens in the implementation and respect of the measures that affects their efficiency. The COVID-19 pandemic proves itself to be one of the most unexpected and major challenges faced by the entire planet. The main experience and lesson learned is cooperation is essential to tackle the crisis and all that it entails. Elasticity, flexibility, and coordination are key prerequisites to provide all the key services. Crisis response needs to be in line with the essential postulates of democracy, such as the rule of law. As part of COVID-19, we've had a number of crisis measures, and they affected the functioning of society and the normal functioning of the lives of the citizens. It was essential to make assessments of the situation, and it was key in the entire crisis response. And it is very necessary to increase the public trust in local and central authorities. At the beginning, the role of the central authorities was dominant. In the next stages, the local authorities had more opportunities to implement policies. Now, when the infection rates are rising again, it appears that central authorities are again increasing to have a major role. The rule of law and human rights in the actions against the pandemic should be in line with the Constitution. The countries must find various innovative ways to reach the public, to provide this essential services, and to make sure that citizens continue functioning amid a pandemic. There was opportunities to work remotely, and this included the public administration, digital tools to provide administrative services, providing information to the public, etc. So the crisis served as a catalyst for the digitalization of public services in a record-breaking time, and the result was efficient and more accessible and user-friendly services. Our COVID-19 response is a reminder for all of us that openness and transparency are of essential importance as components of democratic governments. The public has the right to be informed and have access to transparent and updated information on all aspects. The successfulness of the COVID-19 response depends on all actors in society, not only in terms of the very measures, but active participation in activities that improve the actions and measures of the administrative authorities. In a nutshell, all institutions, all authorities should be up to their task, should be committed and completely dedicated, and to be aware of the state of affairs as it is, and to accommodate the responses and the reactions to the state of affairs, and to achieve public trust and approval for these measures. Thank you. We are pressed for time, and now I would like to move on to our next speaker, Mr. Bojan Marecic, Minister of Justice.
Announced Minister Bojan Marecic, I said that he is responsible for one of the most important reform processes in the country that has some history, but the pace in which we have entered, particularly during the last couple of years, is really accelerating. A lot of movements in positive direction, very important decisions. But as I said also in my announcement, a lot has been done, but more needs to be done in order to come to the point to say that, yes, we are on the level of where we would like to be. In the context of pandemic, even more. So how did the health crisis affect the rule of law? and what can be done to make the work of the judicial bodies to continue in these circumstances, in this environment?
Thank you, Dragan. I know it's not very popular to be the lawyer on the Economic and Finance Forum, but I'll try to explain, and I'll try to explain what has happened and what have we done and what are we going to do in the future. I'm very grateful for the invitation by the Minister of Finance, Minister Besimi, and Deputy Minister Kovacevsky, and I think it's a good opportunity to share some of the information, some of the data, and also some of the conclusions. As already mentioned by Minister Spasovsky, the crisis was something that has not spared any of the areas in the society and in the institutions. So the judiciary was not spared from the effects of the COVID crisis, and it has severely affected the judicial system and all the elements of the judicial system inside and outside the courtroom. But also there are two dimensions that we need to, as a government we needed to take care of during the crisis. The first one is the efficiency of the judiciary on one side, and on the other side the protection of human rights and fundamental rights in conditions of COVID crisis, when there are obvious and necessary restrictions and suspensions of some human rights. I think that the technical government led by Minister Spasovsky has done a great job in the balance between the two. On one hand, the government at that time has tried to make a reasonable acknowledgement of the delays in the judicial processes with a governmental decree, reasonable acknowledgement of the delays in payments of the credits, reasonable acknowledgement of delays in the notaries and all the other executions of court decisions, which was welcomed by the citizens and which was necessary in order to provide a saving plan from the crisis. Also, some of the status of limitations deadlines were frozen, which saved some of the cases and which saved the trust in the judicial system in those difficult circumstances. On the other hand, the necessary suspensions by the government on fundamental rights and human rights were thoroughly reported to the European Court of Human Rights and to the Council of Europe. And currently, as a result of the lessons learned, the government is in a phase of preparing of law on long crisis situation, which should incorporate all the lessons learned from the last year, in close coordination, of course, with the Council of Europe and with the Venice Commission. But what is the main lesson learned for the future and for now, for the current moment when we need to take some measures on the way of managing the crisis in order to provide normal functioning of the courtroom? I think that the logical answer is digitalization in many areas and in many aspects. The digitalization is not a new topic in the judiciary and in the rule of law sector, but it has been drastically accelerated as a topic at the top of the agenda of the Ministry of Justice, but also of the government and of the judiciary. It's inevitable process to digitalize the judiciary at several levels in order to have more efficient, more transparent, more responsible judiciary in this moment and in these circumstances on one hand, and also to protect the fundamental rights of the citizens in front of the courts and in front of the institutions and on a long run. First of all, we have realized that this is an important issue, and we have formed a new body of ICT council in the judiciary, which is providing the expert knowledge for gradual but inevitable and irreversible digitalization of the judiciary. The first move is digitalization of 180 courtrooms across the country in 34 courts. And on a parallel track, we work on interoperability program, which should provide, it sounds very complicated, but it actually means that all the institutions that have some kind of a role in a court process, like cadastre, like custom service, like forensic bureau, all of them will be linked to the court and to the public prosecutor's office in order to provide the services much quicker and much more in a much more transparent and secure way. The ACMIS upgrade of the ACMIS case management system is also part of this process. We have lessons learned from the previous ACMIS case management system, which has been compromised over years with particular cases. Now we try also to implement the lessons learned there. And finally, what will citizens feel in their everyday life is digitalization of the services of the public institutions and courts towards the citizens. And because we want to have quick results and not to wait all the equipment to be installed and then the staff trained and then all of it implemented, we will start first with digitalization of the services. And I believe that the ICT Council of in the Judiciary works very hard to manage in the second half of this month to promote the digital confirmations from the criminal and misdemeanors registry. So we strongly believe, particularly before the local elections, that because all the candidates need to have this confirmation that they haven't been convicted or sentenced. So whenever they take this confirmation in the second half of September, that it will be digital and very quick without waiting in the institutions. So this is the idea, and I think that by implementing this idea on the course of this year and next year, which is totally coordinated with the digitalization process of services promoted by Deputy Prime Minister Nikolovsky, that will certainly increase the transparency, improve the efficiency, increase the trust, which is the second question, and I have a lot to say in that part, but it will also increase the trust and responsibility of the judges. And this is our goal, this is our policy, and this is what we want to achieve, and I think we're moving into the right direction. Of course, we have a lot of things to do, but what is important is to move in the right direction and to speed up, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minister. It's obviously we are in the right direction. Hoping, as I said before, that we will open the accession negotiations sooner is better. And if we do that, I am certain that this will even accelerate, because the motivation, the atmosphere, everything behind when pushing such a complex and difficult reforms will be much easier. Let me turn now to Madam Barbara Komp. Welcome from Vienna, one of our guests that flew yesterday from Vienna. It's good that we have opened these connections. I said at the beginning when I was introducing you, multitasking, multi-level engagement is really impressive. All the fields that you are covering. So from your perspective, what are the main preconditions for growth in these circumstances, but not only from an academic point of view, but also in practical terms? What can work? What structural reforms that are must and what can be developed, evolve? What will require, and that will certainly require, very brave politicians to take bold decisions, not always on the account of their political points and popularity, but something has to be decided and something has to be done when needed. What values you see that would be at risk? How to achieve common understanding of what is needed, and what are the consequences if not doing enough? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for those questions, and I want to thank the Minister of Finance, Basimi, and his entire team for pulling this conference together. Dear ministers, dear deputy ministers, your excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's overdue that we meet again in person to discuss those things. And apart from COVID and the lockdown crisis, we have undergone various paradigm shifts in this new millennium. And we have seen that in earlier times, decisions were transported top-down. Now, thanks to digitalization, and the Minister of Justice has already mentioned that, those are already bottom-up. And I think this is very important, not only for transparency, but also for a form of creating growth and well-being for everybody. You just mentioned modern technology and justice. I would just also use, since it's one of my hats, blockchain technology. You mentioned this situation of catasters, which we in the Western Balkans and in Western Europe take as a given and as granted, but there are parts in the world that do not know what catasters are. So the securitization of property rights, whether it's material or intellectual property rights, physical or intellectual, is really very important. And I think this is one of the digitalization advantages that we need to undergo. But you already mentioned that I should not only put my academic hat on, but let me just touch upon 10 points, just briefly, that are important, not only for the rule of law, for a society that is growing, but also for democracy. And first of all, it's the rule of law. Second is the protection of private property rights, and to be allowed to have private property rights, to ensure those property rights. Then to remove price controls. I mean, in Europe we have seen that. What can happen? You can boost the economy from one day to the other if you remove price controls. Just look what had happened in Germany after World War II, when Ludwig Erhard with General Clay decided we can do that. And then all of a sudden you have the economic miracle. So you have to be very, you have to look at that. Establish free trade. I think we have done that in Europe. We have our 4 European freedoms, but we need to do more, especially here in the Balkans. Limit government spending. I think this is what we have heard already today, and I'm really very happy to hear that you consider the Maastricht criteria in your next budget will be a must-have. And then the next thing is limit taxation. I remember very well when I first came into Skopje more than a decade ago, I think 15 years or a long time ago, it was invest in Macedonia, and then it says there is a flat tax. I mean, whatever you call the tax needs to be proper for investment, whether it's foreign investment or whether it's our entrepreneurs, our local entrepreneurs, and of course those people who work hard, those workers, they must not be taxed away via social security measures. So you have to look at that, which is very important. Then of course remove all those barriers to business fomentation, and then encourage ownership, which I already mentioned. And I think those are, of course, the cornerstones, given that we are within a pandemic, within a lockdown crisis and a health crisis. Many of those things are, of course, hard to sustain and are questionable right now. And Lord Keynes once said, you may invest in public infrastructure, but government may also step back afterwards. And we must not forget that. And I will quote another 2 Nobel laureates who were leaning to the same direction when they said, we need to look into efficiency, which was also mentioned by Minister Maricic, because efficiency is very important, and competitiveness. But competition is a spontaneous process, as Hayek told us, but we need both. Efficient process and competition. Otherwise, we will not be able to fight corruption. Structural reforms, as you already mentioned, need to be brave. And I would say that foremost structural reforms that help create well-being for everybody, because in most of the European governments, it's 2/3 of the annual budget, of the public budget, of the national budget. It's social security, health and pension. So those three things, those are the reforms that you need to go through. Then, of course, it's the second point, how can I finance infrastructure? And I'm thankful to both World Bank and my IMF speakers here, who also mentioned that you need to support seed capital, provide guarantees in order to make sure that capital flows into a country, but there the rule of law is a precondition. If you don't stick to those laws given, then there is no way you will find foreign direct investment. And I think maybe we will touch upon efficiency and competition in the next round, because those are cornerstones also for growth and well-being. And I'll stick to the time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, you have mentioned 10 points, and each of these points can be a separate debate and separate discussion. Yes. But thank you very much for bringing all this forward, because there are a lot of experts I can see in the audience, and those that are following us through the electronic media. And I'm sure that this will raise interest for further discussion on these particular points. But let me turn now to Ambassador, His Excellency Mr. David Gear. From what you have here so far, what you can bring from Brussels, sort of say, what are the main structural reforms in the EU for economic recovery and beyond? Simple question, but I'm sure that you have a lot of details behind it to share with us.
Thank you, Dragan, and I'll try to stick to the 6 minutes. I'd like to join the others who have expressed their appreciation of the efforts of Minister Bassimi and his team in setting up this useful forum, and I hope it will become a regular fixture where we can have this kind of open channel of discussion. The EU's response to the economic impact of the pandemic is aimed on the one hand at sustainable recovery and addressing the global challenges and opportunities that exist. It's a twofold response, financial support and structural reforms. The financial support, what we call under the so-called next generation, in addition to the EU's regular multi-annual budget, is some 750 billion which have been mobilized. Taken together with the EU budget, that comes to 1.8 trillion. Now, while those figures slip by you quietly, I would ask you just to step back a second and imagine yourself that I was sitting here 5 years ago and I was to talk about 750 billion. The audience would be astonished, which just demonstrates both the size of the crisis but also the ambition of the response. The goal is to protect jobs from being lost, companies from going bankrupt, and try and help a sustainable recovery. Not at all easy, and many of the points the previous speaker has just made are very pertinent here. Second, this financial support is linked to structural reforms. So to have access to EU funds under the so-called Recovery and Resilience Facility, member states have to submit their recovery and resilient plans to the European Commission. In this broad package, I would like to emphasize 2 EU priorities that feature prominently: the European Green Deal and the digital agenda. I'm not going to go into details here. The European Green Deal, which of course aims at a carbon neutral continent by 2050, is highly ambitious, involves very numerous activities: renovation of buildings, renewable energy projects, wind, solar, hydrogen, cleaner transport and logistics, and strengthening a just transition fund on the basis of leaving no place or no person behind, something we touched on this morning in the earlier panel. And of course, the digital agenda is designed to adapt the single market to the digital age, both seizing the opportunities of 5G networks, stronger industrial and technological presence in strategic sectors, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, supercomputing and cloud, etc., but also areas such as increased cyber resilience. These agenda items, the Green Deal and the digital agenda, are increasingly reflected in the economic reform programs of North Macedonia and other countries in the Western Balkans. And with the support of the European Union, this will help to make their economies more resilient to possible future adverse shocks. All of this depends upon full respect for the rule of law. And indeed, it's a very live debate that has taken place among the EU member states itself on exactly this point. This is central to recovery. It's also central to the enlargement process. On the European Union side, while designing this recovery package, the Union also looked at how it could support the Western Balkans over and above the support it's been given during the COVID crisis. So it presented an economic and investment plan, some 9 billion, together with guarantees, a further 20 billion. It continues to provide policy advice and policy engagement and dialogue on all of the areas covered by the acquis, and indeed I can confirm that the Minister and I have very regular discussions on many aspects of judicial reform, for example, but also there are structural discussions that take place. We continue to invest in the business environment, business climate, and of course, absolutely right, we have a huge investment in youth, and particularly through the youth guarantees and an engagement with youth. But all of this support depends upon the principle of doing it yourself, and that the leadership comes from here and from business and from investors, and underscoring all of this is the rule of law. I'll be happy to come back a bit later on some of the more specific points related to reforms that we've been, we consider absolutely vital to move forward in these areas. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador, for this round. Last in this round is the Ambassador, Madam Galloway. UK is not an EU member anymore. Personally, I regret deeply because of that, but that's a choice, and that's something that we will have to fully respect. But the point is that over all these decades and even longer, the historical ties, economy, trade, and so on, has bound the UK with the rest of the Europe or European Union, including this region, so deeply that everything that is happening there in UK, everything that is happening on this side in the European Union and the Western Balkan has its impact on both sides. So the crisis hits us all, I would say, even equally. The best way to stay is to stay together as closer as possible. So, Madam Ambassador, what do you think is a good experience from UK that can be used in the region and here, particularly in North Macedonia, in order to reach better, more transparent, accessible digital services? Digital was the word that I caught from several speakers here, but that's the future for the good governance in essence. So what are your views on this, please?
Thank you, and thank you to Minister Bessimi and the Minister of Finance for bringing us all together today. I think, to answer your question from its underpinning point, I mean, good governance and social cohesion are the cornerstones of the future in North Macedonia, the European Union, and the United Kingdom. So I agree that we need to work together on all of them. And I'm very pleased to say that actually the UK has supported some of the more groundbreaking reforms that have taken place here. And society in the UK is based on good governance and social cohesion. But I think the meaning of those words we've had to change over time based on our own experience of what they've meant. And we're still learning and adjusting to respond to what those words mean, including for a newer and younger generation, because social cohesion is about inclusion, and good governance, as I think speakers said in this panel and this morning, means that everyone agrees the rules, knows the rules, and are following the rules. So good governance and social cohesion are underpinning our long-term prosperity, economic future, but where they actually affect us most and where they start are in our own neighbourhoods and where we live. So I agree with the ministers that actually that what we're looking at here is ensuring that everybody has equal access to services, education and employment. For the past 30 years, the UK government has supported social cohesion here in North Macedonia with lots of different projects: education, neighbourhood infrastructure, support to businesses, through to support to minorities, women, youth. And one of the things we've found is we've worked with many talented and committed civil society organisations that really understand their communities and are able to help provide services to citizens. And we've found that our best projects are those where civil society are working in sync with the institutions. And I hope that this will be a common denominator for all the reforms going forward. Because governments working with citizens and CSOs builds the trust in the institutions. And, you know, if you think of recent examples, when the energy strategy was being created, CSOs were integral throughout. When we supported CSOs on management of state-owned enterprises, the government asked for their support and expertise so a better law could be prepared. So better policies are created when CSOs participate. We've also, you've mentioned the fact that we supported reforms in public administration over many years. I'll name a few: the open data portal, the preparation of the technical specifications for the upcoming financial management system, the preparation of the judicial and prosecutor monitoring index. And our experience is that governments need to be fully transparent for the services and policies they make for the citizens. And we have gov.uk is the central point for information and advice for UK citizens. And we now see something similar happening here in North Macedonia with uslugi.gov.mk. It's being continuously upgraded. I see lots of different parts of the government looking at how to upgrade their digital services as part of the central effort to provide as much digital as is useful. And we see this in the judicial reforms the Minister mentioned, through to enrolment of children in kindergartens and primary school. And the reason I think we talk about digital is because for a lot of people that is how they're now experiencing government services. And just to tell a quick personal story, when I arrived here in North Macedonia, just after I arrived, I realised that my daughter's passport was going to expire. So I sighed to myself at the thought of going on gov.uk and trying to fill in a passport application online from overseas. It took me about 5 minutes to fill it in online, so I was like, okay, well, that's not too bad. And then about 2 weeks later, in passing, I said to my husband, oh, when do we need to chase for Abigail's passport? And he said, oh, it's already arrived. And here I am, a civil servant. I have the experience of working with some of the highest levels of government. But actually, the thing that gave me the most faith in my government was actually using a service, seeing it effective, and just feeling really sort of content and happy that I'd had that experience. So I think that sometimes when we get lost talking about the high-level reforms, we need to remember that actually the end user's experience of government is these services that we talk about sometimes a little bit too in the abstract rather than what we really get from them. Thank you. I was trying to save time.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Since we are a bit over time, we will have to accelerate a bit, and please, for the second round, be as specific as possible and concentrate on key elements that might be addressed to the audience or to those that are following us on the internet. Mr. Nikolowski, let's go back to you, Deputy Prime Minister. How do you view the policies of the government for ensuring social cohesion, restoring trust in the institutions, and increasing transparency, cohesion, trust in the institutions, and increasing transparency? Many of the speakers have mentioned these words, but please, your view on this.
Thank you. Because we need to be very short, I will finish in Macedonian language because I write some words during the discussion in the first round, and I would like to be very, very clear.
I think that we addressed many things in the segment of transparency, what is the government doing, what is different from any other time, and what is the key contribution to all generations, and what differentiates us, and I believe that we won't see such processes again, isolated institutions or people that cannot get to their services. The pressure creates that honesty should be of utmost importance, and that's how we should create policies. I was inspired with what we should do about young people. The focus should be returning the confidence in the system, returning the confidence in the institutions. Young people, in my opinion, are angry mostly of impunity, the point that some people are untouchable, and on many occasions we see that responsibility and application of legislation is our key priority and key focus of this government. And when we talk about returning the confidence in eliminating corruption, we talked about digitalization. We have 2 working groups, and I believe that what the government has put as priority until 2022, we will simplify procedures, and we will prove that we can eliminate the human factor. If we eliminate the human factor, we can further talk about elimination of corruption. And we say this often, and we talk about it often with the ministers relevant in these areas, and we believe in this process, and we need to move fast. 230 laws are mapped, and most of them are being harmonized. This sends a clear message that we are focused on interoperability. There are no cases in the drawers, no situation where citizens are disappointed. One thing is to cut the privileges, cutting on the expenses, non-productive expenses, cutting the privileges, official vehicles, or other things that also irritate young people, and they leave out the perception that we are privileged as politicians. We need to change that. And also the last law on public enterprises, we send out a message that quality is important. The managing boards should not be a place for personal interests, but the draft law that passed the government session prescribes the composition of the managing boards, their experiences, also cutting the privileges, the benefits, the law on the origin of assets also will send out a clear message that we are opening a process of civil confiscation of the assets of those that made any wrongdoings, responsibility on the part of all citizens, and to discourage people to I think that we have a lot of tasks ahead of us. We need also political support to achieve all the planned measures to gain, to conduct all the structural reforms. We need to enter politics with honest intentions to do something about the country, but also broad political support for these processes to be realized, and to convince young people that we do everything to keep them here. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Impunity was a word that stuck in my mind. What you mentioned about the efforts the government is doing to eliminate the possibility not to irritate not only young people but all other citizens that expect that every person that will do something wrong should be held responsible for their action. Obviously, Mr. Davids.
Beginning that Mr. Davids has another obligation, so he has been already disconnected from the meeting. I will turn ke odam vednaš na slednji od.
I will continue with the next speaker, Mr. Spasovsky, the Minister for Interior. We faced a lot of catastrophes, different circumstances, some of them objective, some of them due to human error, regardless of the fact whether we are talking about natural disasters or armed conflicts. They all have socioeconomic effects on the society and the health of society. Does greater social cohesion, the second part of this equation, would make it easier to overcome the crisis? I think that one of the crucial resources for planning for renewal after a crisis and the wildfires and other catastrophes that we face is social cohesion, and this social cohesion provides for shorter time for the catastrophe and the recovery phases, because social cohesion strengthens resilience, or a medical term for that. It strengthens the immunity of a society during a crisis and during the time of planning how to overcome a crisis. I personally believe that countries that respect human rights, the rule of law, are best organized countries to manage any type of challenge, and also in a time of crisis of any type. And only such system, a government based on lawfulness, parliamentary oversight, effective inspection, principle of subsidiarity, can provide quality cooperation and coordination and communication at all level of governance, whether it is on a central level or a local level, and also to deliver long-term solutions favorable for the citizens during crisis and tackling time of catastrophe. Regardless whether natural disasters or armed conflicts, all of these occurrences have effects on the society. That's why social cohesion is a key resource in order to renew societies after a time of crisis. And as a social, as immunity of the society, it provides possibility to resolve the inequalities that is important for the inclusive strategies to renew the resources of a society that should be supported by all of the community. Social cohesion is something that is related to the social connection, the solidarity of different categories within a community. And the more this social cohesion, the stronger it is, the stronger will be the immune system of society. The level of social cohesion directs the strength and the length of the period for renewal and the policies for renewal. And also it is important how much this social cohesion will be strong enough to overcome the wedge, the gap that occurs after a period of crisis, politically wise or economically, especially if there is lack of confidence with the public about the measures introduced and implemented. This social gap in a society would be greater. That's why it is important through this social cohesion to define the measures that would be long-term measures, and to provide for putting the society back on track and everyone in the community to feel that the institutions have extended a hand of help. That is important. It is also important to provide civil participation in the processes offered to generate human capital, and also it is important the geographical scale of priorities, a list of priorities that we coordinate. Distribution of resources causes tension, whether on local or national level, and this is additionally complicated with conflicts on a level of community and governmental institutions that can potentially influence to disturb the social cohesion. Often these are issues, for example, who is responsible to identify the problems, where one should seek leadership to deliver solution, who should finance the efforts for revival, and so on and so on. And there we spend most of our time in order to get to the answers. Also, it is important to consult all stakeholders in a process like this and to convince them that the needs of every potentially vulnerable category would be satisfied. And in this way, to strengthen the cohesion planning for recovery is very complex process. It seeks out institutional and civil participation, and if you consult all of the stakeholders in society, we can be successful. So I think that it is very important to build social cohesion in order to create a strong social immunity that will provide us going back on track. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Very nicely you have put social cohesion in direct correlation with good governance, and good governance with trust in the institutions. So that brings me to the next question for the Minister of Justice, Mr. Maricic. How to increase the citizens' trust in judiciary? Because we're talking about trust in all the institutions, but specifically in the sphere of judiciary. It is low almost in all the countries, particularly in the region. There are some empirical data about that, but that should not be an excuse not to make efforts to change that impression. So there is a lot of room for improvement.
In this final round, I'm going to answer in Macedonian. I agree with your conclusions and your position. This is not something that we should evade. This is something that we should focus on and work on. I'm going to share a couple of facts, not as a justification, but for the purpose of better analysis. We are fighting perceptions today that have been gathered for a number of decades. The starting point of change in 2015 or 16 in judiciary in particular, we had a situation of a captured state, which is a very difficult situation, and you cannot escape it overnight unless approaching and implementing radical steps such as vetting, etc. I believe that our judiciary is more active and revitalized compared to what is believed in the public. But yes, we need to improve the public perception and need to improve the results. The Republic of North Macedonia is the only country which in the last 3 or 4 years marks highly ranked former and current government officials who are subject of court proceedings with verdicts. We have effective verdict against a former prime minister. We have a verdict against at least 3 ministers, one chief of secret service, former president of the assembly, and a couple of other high officials from the prior government. And this is a rare case in the region. We can go country by country. We can look at Croatia or Serbia. You cannot find a country with a judiciary score as our country, and I believe that this should be recognized and acknowledged. I don't say that this is sufficient. These are sufficient results, and we should stop there. But this is a fact that needs to be presented and acknowledged. The government, in parallel, endeavors to implement certain measures to change the perception and change the practices. On the one hand, we make attempts to increase the liability and responsibility of judges through the process of filtration. The laws were adopted 2 years ago for a better and more effective assessment of the performance of judges. These methodologies are in place and are effective. 16 judges have been dismissed through these methodologies. Part of them are Supreme Court judges, part of them are basic court judges, appellate court judges. And this is a good score, a good result, which is not sufficient, but is a solid result of together with that, in order to increase the responsibility of judiciary, we are trying to strengthen and increase the resources for better motivation. And in this regard, I would like to commend the efforts of the Ministry of Finance. They are really open to cooperate for the purpose of improving the judiciary by increasing the salaries by 15 to 20% of the judiciary staff, and also opening new jobs for auxiliary staff in the judiciary, and to increase the court budget. And the third component is motivating the citizens for the access to justice. Court taxes decreased by 8%. For the civil procedure, avoidance of continual retrial, so it can only happen twice, etc. So similar practices of this type that facilitate access to justice. This is something that the government will continue to focus on and will continue to strive for. But the judiciary and the practitioners in the judiciary should be more proactive, because they can provide support and help to improve the public perception of the judiciary with the concrete steps, but also with improved communication with the entire judiciary, also in cooperation with the CSOs, the European Union, and all the stakeholders of the international community. We can achieve the most if we are together on the same track, and to improve the public perception of the judiciary.
We are on the same track, and we are all together on the same direction, no matter of the differences that we may have as persons, as party representatives, and so on and so forth. But the citizens expect that the rule of law will function, and that the judiciary is in the center of those reforms, and many citizens are expecting those results, and we are coming closer and closer to the point of being, let's say, more satisfied than if we were before. I'm talking about citizens. Let's turn now to Ms. Colm for my second question. For you is quite simple. Because at the beginning, when I introduced you, I said that your double head or second head is actually in UN institutions and as a member of many groups. So considering your international engagement, what is the role of international institutions that can and should play dealing with the these global challenges? Because we are, at the end of the day, we're all in the same boat. And can we all reach the safe land?
Well, thank you for the question. I want just one last sentence to the last session or to the last round when you asked me about values. And I think this also ties nicely in to what the United Nations with their strategic development goals has also incorporated. Those values are not only individual freedom, but they are also entrepreneurial freedom and most importantly, self-responsibility. And this is something that many people just have forgotten, especially in times of those crises that we all undergo through, that people just, push the questions and push their issues or their problems to the state, and kind of the state is solving them. Those institutions will solve them. Yes, to one extent. We can do this only with cooperation, with division of labor. And that, I think, is most important. So it's the individual is not left alone, but the individual must not give up thinking and acting. So we can only do this together as a group. And this is very important, and this is what I would have liked to add. So having said that, I just dropped this competition competition and efficiency part, but the division of labor is something that we all, as nations, as regions, and this is important to the United Nations as well, as cities, and also as continents, can look closely into, because we can always think, who can do certain things better than others? And then let those people do them. And we have seen that during the COVID crisis with the implementation of vaccinations. We allowed those who were faster to go ahead, and then, of course, competition came in. Things were not optimal, and it was a test for everybody, but the division of labor is a precondition. And this is what the UN also always, and those international institutions, focus on. And then after that, you of course have to coordinate and cooperate. After all, we are human beings, we're social beings. We're used to exchange and to interact. And as I mentioned before, I'm glad that we are sitting here together finally, and that we are allowed to do that. And if we look at Europe, we were always more successful when we cooperated and coordinated and even competed with each other than when we were fighting wars. But competition in a positive sense, trade as an exchange. It's not only intellectual trade by having disputes and discussions, but it's also trade with literal goods and means. And I think this is very important. So this is the role that international institutions can help us learn in our respective countries, in our regions and in our nations. And there the SDGs, I think, are a very good example, and I'm part of a group that is implementing those and I think this has helped many nations also to elaborate and to elevate themselves in the various international indices. So if we look at that, this is a very good thing. And lastly, I think most importantly, when we talk about transparency and anti-corruption, and this is what we have done here in this panel, put a price tag on each and every service that the government provides with taxpayers' money. In other words, so if you make sure that the citizen understands what he gets, what he pays for, then people will all of a sudden also react in a different way. I leave it at that, and I just want to thank you that you also mentioned monetary policy and fiscal policy is very important, and that we need to keep those two separate and must not put them in one basket, which has happened during the pandemic in a couple of continents and countries. And I'm glad that we are on a safer side here. Never do that. Monetary policy is one part, fiscal policy is the other one. Keep them separate. And the price tags and everything. With that, I'll leave it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Even during your first intervention, I said that you have actually thrown on the table a lot of points for further discussion. And this one is definitely a very interesting price tag on the services, something that needs to be further elaborated. And I'm sure that many of the audience and those people that are following our debate, panel discussion, would have many questions. It would have been good if we would have another couple of hours maybe to extend just on that, but since we don't have it,
happy to come
thank
back.
you very much for putting the question, and we'll be looking for answers in some other occasion and on other forums. Ambassador Geer, during your first intervention, you have talked about the EU and EU reforms in general and the new instruments that have been provoked by the circumstances, not only Brexit but also pandemic and other elements that brought to unprecedented decisions, pushed actually the EU to unprecedented decisions. But coming to our environment, I would say, North Macedonia, what are the recommendations of the EU to North Macedonia, how to improve the governance framework and the institutional framework, and maybe a couple of words about how to increase the extend the trust in the government and within the society, because many of the speakers already, not only on this panel but also on previous panels, were talking about the trust. So your views on that, please.
Thanks very much. You'll be aware, of course, that the EU provides regular analysis and recommendations through its annual country report, but there are also joint conclusions of the economic reform programme, which includes an in-depth analysis of the challenges in the economic area. So what are the key issues? Well, of course, the rule of law. The Minister has already outlined a number of issues. It's important the authorities continue to demonstrate firm commitment to the independence of the judiciary, the establishment of a track record of final convictions in cases of high-level corruption, organised crime, and money laundering, and indeed, more generally, respect for fundamental rights in law and in practice, notably freedom of expression, minority rights as part of creating a stable and inclusive society. This is never a one-off exercise. It is, as we know in our own member states, it's a constant process of renewal. When it comes to the governance framework and public administration, the principles, I think, are well known. First of all, the need for transparency in the management of public funds. And we're happy to see that the Ministry of Finance now publishes various monthly and quarterly budgetary reports on its websites. That's a good development. Effectiveness and efficiency of the public administration is another important principle. The British ambassador was totally right when she pointed out what the feeling is like when it works and when it doesn't work. And that's very important in terms of public trust. The EU has recently supported a functional review of the central government that should help ultimately to lead to a more efficient government with less overlap between institutions and clearer reporting lines. And of course, it's important in ensuring the quality of the work of the public sector that there is recruitment and appointment of civil servants and public officials based on merit, and that there are systems there for promotion and retention. And of course, many colleagues have already mentioned this, the importance of the development of a multitude of e-services. So citizens and companies do not have to make the extra cost linked to physical documents, personal visits to institutions, or other factors. On the economic governance side, the European Union, together with candidate member states, in July adopted a set of recommendations for the year to come. For North Macedonia, the most important ones concern the need to improve the realization of capital expenditure, which goes to the issue of capacity, the need to strengthen revenue collection and to broaden the tax base. Also, it's important to strengthen the business environment and the investment environment, and in this, timely consultation is needed of businesses and social partners where legislation will affect their operations. And finally, for a more inclusive approach in the area of employment, there's a need for easier access to labour market policies, particularly for low-skilled, unemployed and people in vulnerable situations. How do you build public trust? It's immensely difficult and it can be shattered so easily. But I think the key is, as colleagues have implied in a number of different ways, it always goes to the fact that actions speak louder than words. And where you can show advances made in practical delivery of services, that's absolutely key. And that can bring, slowly, over time, a generational shift and build in confidence. But it's not something that's gained in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador. And I will move straight away to our last speaker for this panel discussion, to the Ambassador Galloway. Transparency is one of the key words that I caught during the debate and during the discussion, and particularly was emphasized by Vice Prime Minister Nikolowski at the beginning. That was the first word that I've put in my notes. In modern terms, it is a kind of ultimate precondition for good governance. Can you share with us your plans and intentions? Which areas, in which way you can assist our institutions, the country, since you are already doing a lot. You have done a lot actually in the last decade and a half, but you are still very active, and I can see that the projects that you are developing and you are involved in are very much helping exactly to increase the transparency of the government and transparency of the institutions. Maybe when you share your points, we'll be even more clear what are your priorities when approaching the assistance to our institutions. Please.
Okay, so it's 6:59, so I won't set out the UK's programme, but I will say just 2 quick points. So first of all, it's the same as everyone else. Transparency matters. That's what creates accountability. So that's why we support open data, open processes, open decisions, open criteria. We see where it succeeds, the appointments of independent commissions, the work that's being done on the new budget law. I hope that's adopted soon. That will provide a greater level of accountability. We also see where it fails. I won't give any examples. The media matters. They have a role here. They need to ask questions. They need to be given answers. And they need to explain to the public what's happening, and that's something else that we support and other partners also, including the EU, have done a lot of work on over recent years. So we breathe the same air, we use the same streets, we're drinking the same water. That in a way is social cohesion, and if people have access to this, access to these services at the same level and at the same quality, and know that that's what they're getting for their taxes, then that's good governance. And I think that's the multi-generational progress that we're aiming for. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And this is an excellent roundup of what we have discussed. With this last intervention, we are closing our panel discussion on good governance and social cohesion. I enjoyed it a lot. I hope that the audience enjoyed it as well, and those that have been following us on the internet or social media. I have 10 words: transparent, coordination and efficiency, youth, that was mentioned. We have to speak more about youth, digitalization, preconditions that we need to meet, so adjustability, adaptability, green agenda, digital agenda goes without saying together, civil society and the role of the civil society, increasing importance all the way, impunity or fights against impunity, the values that we should always keep in mind, because this is the essence that a starting point, and that's where we have to end with. And media is the last one. We always have to keep in mind media can spread the words and intentions and our ideas faster than anybody else. I would like to thank, first of all, to the panelists for excellent contribution, for excellent points. I would like to thank to the audience that stayed with us until the end. To thank to those that followed us through the social media, to the translators. I don't know, I can't see them, but I'm sure that they're doing a great job. A lot of excellent remarks, observations, and let's say food for thoughts and for next debates. I wish all the best to the Ministry of Finance, and I hope that this conference will become an annual conference and that next year we will have a chance to come back and to see what has been discussed, what has been promised, and what has been implemented in the year to come. So thank you very much to all, and with this I would like to close the session.